Being a software developer, you're used to the fact that the first thing you build is never the right thing. Okay, it just isn't. And I've seen time and time again that version 1 is usually completely wrong. Version 1.5 kind of gets you there, and maybe version 2 is good enough and you never get to version 3, 4 or 5, and that's it. So very comfortable with the idea that the first thing that I build isn't going to be the right thing. And I've certainly come to believe that failure is the biggest, well, hindsight is the most powerful tool that we have. Learning from failure teaches you more than success.
Welcome to Entrepreneur's Handbook Podcast, where we share inspiring startup stories with practical takeaways for you, the listener. Today we have with us Ezechi Britton MBE, who's a founding member, principal and CTO of Impact X Capital. He's also a co-founder of Code Untapped and was a co-founder of Neybar. How are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you doing today?
Good, yeah. So we've had a long day each, I think, before we've had this.
Absolutely. It's the tail end of the day, and reaching the evening. Maybe go to a pub quiz later. So you're holding me back from that, man. So this is...
You can never get in the way of a pub quiz, right? Like we're obviously both in like London.
100%. I'm going with my girlfriend and her friends, so I can't keep them waiting, unfortunately.
Yeah, you know who the real boss is.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So anyway, it's great to be on this with you today.
So how did this all start for you, right? So going right back to the beginning, like what made you become an entrepreneur? Because you were in developing before, you're doing other different things. What made you like take the leap and start your own business?
Well, I guess, so for those of you who don't know, I was a technologist in the investment banking space for over 10 years. So I've been at Lehman Brothers and then Credit Suisse. And I was a software developer. Really enjoyed it, actually. I had a great time. It was a fantastic place to be. But entrepreneurship had always been something I wanted to do. It's an area I'd always wanted to focus on. And initially, actually, it wasn't even banking technology or anything like that. I wanted to work in video games, as most kids, most programmers my age wanted to. And not only work in video games, I wanted to take it to that next level. I wanted to own my own video game studio. That clearly didn't happen. But whilst I was in the investment banking space, I never lost that ambition to start something and to run my own business. And whilst I was at Lehman Brothers, I was there through the financial crisis. And when Lehman went under and were taken over by PwC and put them into administration, I actually spent a period of that time with Lehman and PwC focusing on my own concept and idea, which was actually healthy food snacks and protein shake vending machines. Didn't quite work out, but it really kind of got that sense into me that, yeah, actually this idea of building something, running something is really what I want to do. And after that, I joined Credit Suisse as a contractor. And even that, actually, being a contractor for me was actually the first step, practical step towards entrepreneurship. I loved the idea that I had to renegotiate my contract every 6 months. I wasn't tied in. There wasn't this worry about IP ownership because, you know, when you're an employee, there's that whole thing about, well, does what you do in your spare time, is that your property or is it the property of the company you work for, and blah, 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 blah. And you just eliminate that by being a contractor. And you also earn more money, which meant that I was building up runway and my own war chest. So that was fantastic. But whilst I was at Credit Suisse, I started working on a few ideas of my own with some of my team at Credit Suisse. Didn't quite come to fruition, but again, it just reinforced this idea that I wanted to build something. And during that time, a good friend of mine called Martin from my days at Lehman actually reached out to me about this crazy peer-to-peer lending idea that he had. And he had this horrible name for the company of Cooperativa at the time. And I thought to myself, initially, actually, I thought, well, this is a bit crazy. It's a bit big. I'm trying to build this thing myself. Let's touch base in a few months. And he, to his credit, came back to me 6 months later and said, look, I've slimmed down the idea a little bit. What about this? And at this point, I'd actually been spending the last 6 months trying to build out an e-commerce site as part of the work, part of the startup I was trying to launch. And I had a lot more confidence in myself around being an externally facing, client facing technologist. Because in the banking world, you get very advanced in terms of the tech that you build, but it's all internal. The security is taken care of. Scaling is not something you're that worried about. And user experience is the last thing you have to think about. So when I was building this, I was really having to think about cloud-based technologies, security, being externally facing, and all this stuff. And actually, I developed a lot more comfort around that. And I said to Martin, I said, look, you know what? Let's go for it. Right? Let's do it. Let's do this. So I then actually spent the rest of that year, while still at Credit Suisse, building this idea out in my spare time. At some point, literally on the desk by my side, I had my laptop connected to a screen using the guest Wi-Fi. So I was like, well, I'm not using company resources, and I'm a contractor. You pay me for output, not my time. So this is absolutely fine. And frankly, my manager supported me. He was absolutely cool with it. So I was building this idea out, and we launched what became known as Neybar whilst I was still at Credit Suisse. And I ended up dialing down my hours from 5 days a week to 3. And I would literally fly back from Zurich on a Wednesday night to London, work on this idea with my co-founders, Martin and Monica, by this point, from Thursday to Friday. I'd be carrying on working over the weekend, and then I'd fly back to Zurich on the Sunday. And I did this for about 6 months, just back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then we eventually launched Neybar whilst we were still in full-time employment in February 2013, got that off the ground, got that going. And it was what you might consider a very poor start, right? We were an online lending company providing salary deducted lending facilities to UK employees. And we probably did about 4 loans in year 1. So terrible start to anything. But it gave us the confidence to start working on this and start speaking to people. And during the course of that year, we ended up speaking with Police Mutual, who were a financial services organisation providing financial products to the UK police force, but credit was one of those that they didn't. So over the course of that year, we started working with them. They agreed, actually, yes, we do want to launch something with you. We'll be a core pilot anchor for you. At which point I decided, that's it, got to go full time. So I quit my job in Credit Suisse in Switzerland. I flew back to the UK, and we ended up launching Neybar in February 2014. And the rest is kind of history from that point on. We raised over £200 million. We were Goldman Sachs' largest investment in fintech at the time. They put over 100 million to work in us. And we lent out over 170 million to UK-based employees. So that was really when I kind of went fully into the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
So I'm just going to unpack a few of the things you said there as well, because one thing I found interesting, you said you had a lot of failed ideas before you actually got to Neybar, right? And you said, what I found interesting, you said that gave you confidence to keep going. Right. Whereas other people might see that as I failed, I'm not cut out for this. I enjoy building stuff, but then nothing is working. But you took the opposite approach. And obviously that approach really helps as an entrepreneur, because nothing works first time. If it works first time, a lot of luck is involved. And a lot of people do have a few failures before they continue. How did you have that mindset to be able to say, yes, this didn't work out, but I learned these skills and that's going to help me go forwards? How do you think you were able to kind of keep pushing forwards?
Well, first, I think being a software developer, you're used to the fact that the first thing you build is never the right thing. Okay? It just isn't. And I've seen time and time again that version 1 is usually completely wrong. Version 1.5 kind of gets you there, and maybe version 2 is good enough and you never get to version 3, 4 or 5, and that's it. So very comfortable with the idea that the first thing that I build isn't going to be the right thing. And I've certainly come to believe that failure is the biggest, hindsight is the most powerful tool that we have. Learning from failure teaches you more than success. When you succeed, all you learn is, what I did worked, right? But when you fail, you realize I can't do that again. I need to find another way. And it makes you far more resilient. And I think that ability, coupled with, I've got a martial arts background. I've been used to being told I'm wrong, been beasted, do this, do it again, not good enough. And you get used to that idea that failure isn't failure. Failure is just part of the journey. And I think if you can embrace that, that becomes a very powerful mechanism for success.
So what you said about the martial arts background there, so I share that as well. So I did like karate for over a decade. I was like national squad for a while. And it's the whole thing of what I learned as well, is that the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. So when I was a black belt, I was less confident in my abilities than like a few years earlier. And it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's more that I knew, okay, there's so much more for me to learn. And you pay more attention to your mistakes. Whereas I think sometimes when people have got insecurity around them, then any mistake, it kind of catastrophizes. Whereas when you've got that confidence like you had, you can take that feedback and push it forwards and keep going.
Absolutely.
And like another interesting thing you said earlier as well is about how your manager really supported you. And you obviously said about how you went down from 5 days to 3 days initially before taking it full time. And maybe some people out there are thinking about this idea. And I think there's a lot of people who think you've got to go all in straight away. And they go from, okay, you quit your job and then you go all in. Whereas obviously you doing what you're doing and getting that support of your manager would have helped you get things off the ground and get comfortable and build your runway. How did that conversation come about? Like, could you give any advice to people who maybe would want to do that themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think it helped that I was a contractor. Definitely. I think it also helped that my manager could see that this was the direction of travel for me. And it was a case of either keep me for a bit longer on 3 days a week or I leave. Right? So which one of these do you want, right? And I think that's one of the things to recognize. Everything's a negotiation. And it's just what approach, mindset are you willing to take entering that negotiation? And recognize that there is support where you can find it. And sometimes, you know what, you have to go into that realizing that your manager might say, no, I'm not prepared to do this. At which point you have to say, fine, this is the outcome. So you've got to be prepared to walk away in any of these situations. Otherwise, it's a non-starter, right? But I think I've been fortunate. A lot of my managers have been very, very supportive of me and a lot of the actions that I've taken over the years.
And it's like you said there. So when I quit my job, my bosses, they said, we could try to keep you. We could try and give you a salary increase with the things. But they said there's no point really, because we know you want to do that more. We'll keep you here. You're going to be unhappy. Wait, okay. I just saw lost server connection, but it's back again now. So I'm just going to repeat that. So when I left my job, my bosses said to me, we could try and keep you, but there's no point. And I think this attitude is becoming more common now of managers and people at companies realizing if somebody's got this desire to do something, you can either fight against them and sour the relationship, burn the bridges, or you can actually support them. And then in the future, you might collaborate together. You could do different things together. And there could be different ways where you don't even know about it yet, but they could help each other out. So it's there's no point in trying to force somebody to do something or keep them in a job where they're unhappy, because they're obviously it sucks for them to be unhappy in a job that they don't want to do, but it's also bad for the manager to have an unhappy team member, because that's going to rub off on the rest of the team too. So it's that coercion doesn't really work.
Absolutely. And for some people, that outcome might not be the same outcome as for me. They might learn a whole bunch of lessons and go, you know what, actually, I prefer being where I am. This journey is not great, but what you've got to also identify or recognize are the skills that they might learn through doing that. The really interesting thing about when I was in that process of building Neybar and in essence stepping away from Credit Suisse was that I was developing a whole host of skills I hadn't had before. I was building the entire system by myself. I hired a bunch of Indian offshore developers. I was managing them. I built an entire continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline off the back of that on Team City and Azure, so cloud-based. These were things we weren't able to do at Credit Suisse. And strangely, as I was trying to step away from the organization, the company was giving me more responsibility. Right? So I was suddenly becoming in charge of projects and strategic rollouts, global strategic rollouts and the rest. And it was a really eye-opening moment for me when I recognized that actually doing all of this had made me more valuable to Credit Suisse, but I hadn't developed those skills in Credit Suisse. And I think the ultimate moment for me was when I eventually left the organization. We launched Neybar. And then a number of months later, I got an invite to an entrepreneurs conference run by Credit Suisse. I probably would never have been able to attend if I just had been in the company saying, hey guys, I want to be an entrepreneur, right? So yeah, it was really interesting. I think it's really important for managers to recognize the skills that people can develop through doing these things that they may not be able to develop within your team.
So I always think about this as well. For example, with EY, they have the Entrepreneur of the Year award. But then obviously they're a large corporation who've got many people in the hierarchy and the corporate positions where obviously they do try their best to encourage people. But there is this odd situation sometimes where you have, obviously EY want to encourage entrepreneurs because if you build a business, then they then become clients. Right. They don't necessarily want their own employees to start building businesses and leave the company. So there's this weird like friction in some ways between those two different areas I think a lot of large corporations have to deal with. And one thing I find interesting too, because obviously you mentioned how Monday to Wednesday you were Credit Suisse and then Thursday to the end of the weekend. How was your personal life in that time? Because obviously it must have been so difficult where if you're constantly working, did you find you were burning out? Like, were you able to deal with it okay? Like, how did that situation play out?
You know, the irony of this is the only time I started to feel burnout was when I went full time at Neybar. And at Neybar, we were working 8 till 9 every day, Saturdays, Sundays, Christmas, whatever. I think I had the least holiday out of anyone in the organization. And the most important thing was I stopped doing all the activities that I enjoyed and I was just doing the work. But when I was splitting my time between Credit Suisse and London working on Neybar, I was still in the evenings, I was still learning to dance salsa, like Cuban salsa. I was still going to the gym. I was Thai boxing. So I started off with karate, ended up Thai boxing. And I was ring fighting as well in that. And I would still try and find some time to go out with friends on a Friday night. But I'd be doing all of these things. But the reality is it was those things that gave me the energy. It was those things that allowed me to stay mentally stable and be able to continue to drive on these things. And when I went full time on Neybar and stopped doing all of those things, that was when burnout kicked in. And I say this to everyone: the journey's tough, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. But no one tells you you're going to be sprinting the whole way. But it's those activities that give you the energy, nothing else. So don't ever sacrifice those things. Don't let anyone tell you, oh, we're too busy, you can't go to the gym, we're too busy, you can't do this. If I don't, that's going to kill us faster than me taking an hour out of my day to do that thing.
I think I had the similar kind of thing on a much smaller scale because I didn't go and build a $100 million company plus, right? But when I was doing everything on the side, it was during the pandemic, right? So I had no social life and it didn't really matter in some ways because I couldn't go anyway. And I thought once I quit my job, I'm going to have tons of time. But it's weird how it all fills up. And did you find that in some ways you thought, okay, now I'm going to have loads of time because I don't have my Credit Suisse job.
Yeah.
And then you were surprised and how has this happened? How have I now given up all my hobbies when I was able to have them while I had a day job? Did that take you by surprise at all?
The thing is you always fill the time, right? There's always more that you can be doing. I've got a million things on my to-do list that I could be doing right now instead of this podcast, right? And this is what I say to people is you can stay up until 9, 10, 11, 3 o'clock every morning. There will always be more things for you to do. Always, right? So A, no, that doesn't surprise me at all. And B, it's the case of it's down to you to control your schedule, right? It's down to you to look at what is realistic, what is going to kill me, right? Even now I do an insane amount of stuff, right? I'm involved with my primary day job is Impact X. I support our portfolio. I mentor for MSD UK, Foundervine, and a number of other organizations. I advise Crisis and their venture studio. I'm on the steering committee for Spring, the water sector's Centre of Innovation, and I'm chairman of YOM as well. And I have my organisation, Code Untapped, that's working with Imperial College on their 40 Black Scholarships programme. I'm incredibly busy, but I guarantee you, people will still give me more stuff that I could go. I'm like, should I do that? And I'm like, I'm sure
I think it's part of being an entrepreneur, right? Is that you like these new opportunities, and it's
Exactly.
that whole difficult thing of you like the new challenge, but then it's you. I think it's when you agree is a different moment to when you actually have to do it. And when you actually have to do it, that's like, oh no, I'm really busy. But then when you agree, it's like, oh yeah, I can probably make this work. And I think we have that constant delusion, but also it's what keeps us going and it gives us that excitement, right?
Absolutely. But also I think founders, by their nature of decision, are deal makers. And we're always looking for that next opportunity, right? And every time and this is what most people don't recognize, every time we say no, that's a potential opportunity that we've lost, right? That's an opportunity that could have led to finding a great team member or finding a new client or raising some more money or maybe leads to being a Ned for something in the future. And trying to say no to those things is really hard, especially as well when you think, yeah, but I can do that. I found time last time. I can do that. Right? And that is really, really difficult thing to do. That's probably the thing I find the hardest. Execution's execution, delivery is delivery. Hard work is just hard work. Saying no to opportunities, that takes real self-discipline. That's probably my hardest challenge. That's one of the things I specialize in, is just being able to switch, and work out what I need to from meeting to meeting, call to call, action to action, deliverable to deliverable. And I think that is really the core of what being an entrepreneur is, right? It's about being able to deliver at all costs, no matter what the challenges are. And that's just something that I don't want to say we're special, but it is unique to entrepreneurs, I believe.
And if we talk about your main day job now, right? So what's the reason behind Impact X? I'm guessing it's from your own experience as an entrepreneur and you're trying to help more people, but how did Impact X come about?
So bear in mind, I didn't found Impact X. Impact X was founded by Eric Collins, but it came about from a group of senior Black business people, entertainers, entrepreneurs coming together to really solve the problem of how do we increase access to finance for creatives, actually, is where Impact X started. So that's why you've got people like Lenny Henry and Adrian Lester involved in Impact X. And the idea was, well, what can we do? How do we support black entertainers, Black creatives who over-index? Let's raise some money. Well, can we raise money? Well, we wouldn't raise much by ourselves. Okay, tell you what, we should create a fund to do this. But if we're going to do a fund, we can't just focus on creative. We've got to focus wider than that. We've got to think about technology, startups, the rest of it. Okay, so who's going to do this? We need someone to set that up. That's where Eric Collins came into the picture. Then Eric, well, your job, let's build Impact X, but now you need a team. That's where me, Paula, Yvonne, and Erica came into the picture. But ultimately, what our mission is to increase access to capital for underrepresented and diverse entrepreneurs. So 96% of capital has gone to all white male founding teams. We're here to support that other 4%.
And obviously you were one of those entrepreneurs yourself who was in that 4%. And probably when you first raised capital, it was less than 4% as well.
Oh, yeah. Oh, bear in mind, Black entrepreneurs, it's 0.24%. Black female entrepreneurs, it's 0.2%. So to put it into context, if you had 1,000 entrepreneurs in the room backed by venture capital, 2 of them would be Black. Okay, so absolutely.
Which is insane, right? And obviously you were able to overcome that bias to raise money with Neybar. What do you think enabled you to do that? How did you convince these people who maybe were always used to seeing a certain type of face that they were going to invest in? How do you kind of break through that bias?
Well, one of the things I have to be clear about is that we didn't actually raise from venture capital, right? We raised from family offices, from high net worth individuals, and then we kind of skipped VC and went straight to institutional with Goldman Sachs. So we just didn't do it, right? So the question is how did we raise that much money without ever going near VC, looking the way we do, right? And I think that's, frankly, it's a combination of our backgrounds, our experience, and I say our backgrounds in banking, right? Our skill sets, which were highly complementary. We had a deep network in the banking space. And ultimately, when Goldman put money into us, Monica and Martin were both ex-Goldman Sachs, right? So you've got to consider that. So I think that knowledge, understanding, deep network of the finance sphere, as well as having direct relationships and skill sets within that space, it's really helped us. But ultimately, we built a product, we got it out there, we built traction, and we delivered, right? And I think that's what enabled us to raise against that backdrop.
And what do you think? So obviously, you've got a fund that you help manage now, which is investing in these founders. But what else can be changed? And I think so I met you at a panel event, right? And one of the things, I can't remember if it was you who said it, or somebody on the panel said this, about how often male founders are asked about their dreams and what they hope to achieve. And female founders are asked about, well, how are you going to overcome this hurdle? How are you going to overcome that? And they're asked to put on the defensive straight away. And that was something which I never thought about. And I've always gone through my own head, like, how do I ask questions like that myself? Am I putting that bias in my questions and trying to make sure I don't do that in the future? But what other things are there like that? Or what things need to be changed in the way the process works so that it doesn't rely on just different funds to try and invest in underrepresented founders, but is that broad scale of like, what can the entire industry, what should they be doing?
Yeah, I think to be clear, that generally comes down to, I think you could describe it as, VCs tend to focus on upside opportunity when speaking to white male founders and downside risk when speaking to female founders. And people who fit elsewhere on the spectrum tend to come somewhere in the middle. All right. So what can be done? I mean, we've tried to get investors to broaden their network, right? Invest wider. And actually, we saw it happen during the pandemic. I think there was a 4x increase in investment into Black entrepreneurs. Post-pandemic, during the most recent crisis, that's dipped way back down to pre-pandemic levels. So what we've seen is that we're still seen as a risk, right? When times are good, they'll take a risk on us. When times are bad, they go back to what they're comfortable with. So there hasn't actually been a change. We've just seen the risk premium reduced for us for a period of time, and now it's back to where it was. So I'm going to be really, really frank. I think the only real solution to this is you need more fund managers from diverse backgrounds, right? That very panel you spoke about, some of the opportunities that we saw on that panel, their first investments were from people who looked like them, right? Fundamentally. So we need more diverse people in VC. But for that to happen, we need LPs to prioritize diverse fund managers. We need them to look at first-time fund managers and use a slightly different lens when focusing on them. We need organizations like the British Business Bank to really prioritize investing in first-time fund managers. And that's not saying that all the capital has to go to them, but let's get some, right? The money from a lot of these organizations comes from us, right? So why don't we get a say in where it goes, right? There's an interesting piece under the Khalifa review, and the Khalifa report was about enabling pension funds to invest in venture capital. Well, guess what? That is absolutely our money in those pension funds. And if they're going to start investing in VC, you want to hope that some of that is going to go towards underrepresented entrepreneurs, because to be clear, underrepresentation includes women and includes ethnic minorities. Ethnic minorities are 13% of the population. Women are 50%. Let's put those together. Half those ethnic minorities will be women. That means 57% of the population comes from an underrepresented demographic, and yet only 4% of funding goes to them. That is a problem. And if you're going to start taking pension capital and putting it into these funds, and that's our money, we better start distributing that a little bit more evenly. So that's where I kind of start and finish on that side of things. I mean, we can talk about skills, we can talk about ideas, we can talk about, are you building venture scalable businesses? There is a real issue with experience levels as well, because one of the things we look at is, have you founded a company before? Well, if you haven't been backed, probably not, right? Have you got industry experience? Well, if you're suffering systemic racism within your industry, probably not. So how do we break through? So there are issues there too, but that's probably the lens from which I start.
So one of the organizations I've just founded myself is the Bay HQ, and BAE stands for British Asian Entrepreneur. And I think a lot of it as well comes from this idea of a lot of people, because they haven't seen people who look like them into positions they want to be in, then there's also resistance of like, well, if I don't have a chance, then what's the point in trying to? And it's showing people sometimes like, here, look, like somebody like you, for example, this is why I want to get you on, because I'm showing people like, look, there are people like there who want to help, who have got the experience, they've been there and done it. And it's overcoming that too. And like, it's, the problem is because you can't tell people, oh, believe in yourself if there's nobody out there who's done it, right? Because then they don't have any evidence. And it's how do we get more people who've, like once we get the success stories, to make sure that people know about your success stories as well. And people are proud of those people, and they can, it's people who get up, they also need to pull everybody else up with them as well. And in my own community, I feel like sometimes there's been a kind of competitive aspect of they've done that, so they want to keep the status themselves. And it's something I'm trying to challenge a lot now and say like, no, like we can all win. Like it doesn't need to be you against me or anything like that.
Yeah, so I mean, crabs in the barrel is the phrase that you hear there, right? Queen bee syndrome is another one, right? I want to just touch on that very, very quickly. Do you need to see people like you to be successful? Clearly, the answer is no, right? There are people out there who have been successful who didn't have those peers to look up to, right? And this is the problem. People start to discrepancy build when we make these arguments. They go, yeah, but how did you do it then if that wasn't the case? That's not the point. The problem is we have had to go to exceptional lengths to achieve that success, right? Why should we all have to go to those exceptional lengths to achieve? When if you come from a certain background, you don't have to be exceptional to achieve. Let's just look at our current government, right? And have a look at how exceptional those individuals are and focus more on where they came from as to how they got there, right? There is an implicit affirmative action that goes on for a certain group of individuals in our country. Typically, you know, they went to Eton, they went to Cambridge, they can just waltz into whatever they want to do. So they don't have to excel to achieve, but we all have to excel to achieve. And that to me is a fundamental mismatch, right? We need to be able to have regular people succeeding simply because they worked hard, not because they were extraordinary or extraordinarily lucky, right? That's part of the problem that we have. And when we see fantastically capable people succeed, unfortunately, they get given that mantle of, well, there's excellence right there. That's what we need to see. It's like, no, actually, that's the exception to the rule. We shouldn't need to be the exception to be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And even what you said there about like our own government, right? So like a lot of the listeners right now would be American, but obviously, you know, the British government, it's now Rishi Sunak, who's like Indian in charge, basically, Indian heritage. But if you look at his schooling background, he's not necessarily representative of the average person from an ethnic minority background in the country at all, right? And it's one thing of like, yeah, we're taking pride in somebody who's like, for example, somebody's got the same color skin as me to be the prime minister. But then there is those different levels of privileges of like, one is like ethnicity, one is schooling, like your gender, like all these different things, and it's how it plays together. And I think for me, the point about showing off the success story, it's like I said, it's got to be showing the success stories, but not saying you have to work as hard as them or you have to be like them to be successful. It's also just showing like, it is, I think it's more, not necessarily from somebody outside perspective, but within our own community, being like, look, there are these people getting there. How are they getting there? And what can they do to help out as well? And it's got to be that, like you said, like what you're doing right now, right? You've got there and you're bringing people up with you. And it shouldn't have to, the problem is, it shouldn't have to be you doing it. It should be the institutions. And it's this frustrating thing of where if you don't do it, then who's going to do it? Even though they should.
My job and the job of people like us is to make it easier for the next generation to step up, right? Don't get me wrong. I don't want to have to wait multiple generations to see success. I want it all to happen now. But every one of us who is successful, we need to open those doors and make it easier for the next person to step up so that we see a broader array of successful people. It's not just, oh, okay, that black person was successful because they went to Eton and Cambridge. I'm not talking about Kwasi Kwarteng, although I might be. And, it's like we need to see, oh, these people were successful because they worked hard and because they were good at what they did. And maybe they were a bit lucky, but that's normal. That's what we want to see, right? That's what we need to start seeing.
And we've only got a few minutes left. So what I want to do is give you a chance to shout out 3 people who you think from underrepresented backgrounds, or it could be anybody really, who you want to give that shout out to, you think is doing great work and maybe isn't being appreciated enough. Or if there's any VCs listening, or maybe those VCs should be thinking about maybe we should be investing in them. It can be whoever you want to shout out here.
It's so hard because I know so many good people, and if I shout out anyone, I'm like, who have I left out? And everyone's going to be super mad at me. So I've got to say Yvonne Bargella, who was my co-principal at Impact X. She's now at Local Globe doing amazing things. She's on the Forbes 30 under 30. Andy Davis, one of the top pre-seed, early stage black VCs I know out there. And then Jason Halstead, who is my co-founder at Code Untapped, and he's now launched Yome, an organization which I'm chairman of, which enables startups to connect, engage, and get paid, so small businesses. So there you go. There's 3 names. And I apologize to anyone listening to this who did not hear their name.
First of all, thank you so much for coming on. And then where can people find you and what should they be looking out for? Like what's coming up in the future for you that they should be following you for to like learn about what you're up to?
I mean, I'm easy to find. I'm on LinkedIn under Ezechi Britton. Ezechi Britton MBE. You can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram, although my Instagram is incredibly boring. But if you're looking for fundraising, the best way to reach us is through Impact X Capital's website. So there is an intake process for startups with underrepresented founders who are looking to fundraise. In terms of what's coming up, our big focus at Impact is closing our next fund so that we can start investing again at pace. And so we can start driving more unicorns like Marshmallow, who we invested in our first round and have now been valued at over $1 billion. So we want to see more successes like that coming out of our next portfolio.